All right, folks, we are up and running. We are live. Let me check if our AV is good. TJ, do you want to say something?
Sure. Sounding pretty good to me.
All right, I can also, since I have you on Skype, I also hear your voice, but I'm hoping that the video, the stream does grab your voice. If anybody's in the chat room, if you do not see our audio come through, please let us know. All right, let's start. So, welcome and good morning if you're joining us East Coast, Central Time. Although TJ doesn't think Central Time is a thing at all. East Coast
Now,
is the right time, right?
if you're on Central Time, you are on the wrong time. Like your clock should be set to Eastern Time. It's the canonical
Right,
time zone.
right.
So,
All right, and if you're joining us from Europe or APJ, EMEA, good afternoon, good evening. And welcome to CodeItLive. This is our channel where we have a lot of fun sharing the stuff that we are passionate about, coding live with you all. TJ, it actually snowed this morning. It actually is still snowing. And it's
oh
like second
man,
week of April. You got to feel for the
we,
kids a little bit, right?
yeah, no, it's nuts. We don't have snow, but it got suddenly like yesterday we had a 60 some degree day and it was amazing. We spent a lot of time outside, and today it's in the low 40s.
Yeah.
So, like low single digits Celsius. It was. So it's not fun,
No.
but we got to at least a nice day yesterday to
Yeah, we
enjoy
did
it.
too, but
So
I mean, everybody is just trying to juggle like work with having kids around the home, and it's hard. It's hard for the kids when they can't even go outside. So I feel for them. In the chat room, I have my good friend Brian Lagunas. Hey, Brian, good to see you. Good to see a fellow streamer. Brian is out of Idaho, and he pretends to be the old man yelling at the cloud sometimes. He often is seen in his Twitch stream with a robe on, so he has fun. Okay, so let's get started. We want to be maybe a little appreciative of the people's time. So we said we'll go an hour. We can talk about Xamarin, we can talk about mobile dev all day long, but we'll try to keep it an hour. And here's what we're trying to do. So TJ and I, well, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Sam Basu. I'm a developer advocate here at Progress Software. I mostly focus on the Telerik side of the family, which is all of .NET. And TJ?
yeah, I'm TJ VanToll. I'm also a developer advocate at Progress, and I work on some more of our web-centric stuff. So things like Kendo, UI, Kendo React, and such.
All right, cool. It's actually funny. I'm just noticing my shirt has a ninja and it's green, which is
Ah,
not turning out
the
well.
green screen is filtering it
Yeah,
out.
so I don't have a hollow chest, just so you know. Yeah, it's a regular shirt that's just green.
I
Uh,
wonder. So I was debating between my Tigers hat and my Michigan State hat.
yeah.
So I'm curious if the
Is it
filter.
green? Yeah.
It is green,
Oh, well,
yeah.
let's try it. Then you'll have a hollow on your head.
Yeah, that actually like that's pretty
That's actually just
impressive.
whitish. Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah, but it's like able to differentiate
Right.
between the shades of green
Yeah.
pretty well.
Well, it's all got to do with like the filters and how much saturation it has.
Yeah.
All right. Brian says, don't forget Prism for Xamarin Forms. Yes, I'll mention definitely, Brian. This is kind of one-on-one. So let me set the stage. So TJ and I love going to tech conferences. I think this is one of the things we do wonderfully well in the software community. We have lots and lots of conferences, small ones, regional ones, national ones, global ones. And we essentially get to hang out with people who are like-minded, and we get to learn from each other, and hopefully have some good food, get to some cool places. It's all good, but none of that is happening right now, right? So we are all at home, hopefully being safe with our families. Now, one of the things that this is an advice I'm sure you've heard before. It's stepping out of your comfort zone, and I'm sure others have said the same thing. But I like when I'm at a conference, I would like to go into a session that I have absolutely zero idea about. Right? It's just a complete kind of a topic that I have no idea, and I'll get a different perspective. Maybe I'll learn something. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here. So last week, TJ got on and showed me or taught me some React. And that was fun. I think we got to the DOM part of it and like how the components interact. Is that right, TJ?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yep.
we might get into like some state next up. But this week, we thought we will get TJ into learning some Xamarin. And yeah.
No, I'm excited to be here because I get to play the heckler role. I can come in with zero responsibilities other than to
Yes.
give Sam a hard time. So
So
should be fun.
yes, should be fun. Like I said, there's a lot going on. Brian in the chat room talked about Prism. That's a design pattern, MVVM, which we'll talk about. This is kind of a one-on-one. Like I said, we probably cannot boil the ocean in an hour. We can try taking small bites of it. So let's start, and then, like I said, like what you're looking at is about 8 to 9 years of work by some very smart people. So there's a lot going on in the ecosystem. But let me ask you, what do you know about Xamarin?
So basically, my Xamarin knowledge is I know it is a tool that lets you build native iOS and Android apps. So it's not doing any like WebView stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I know you work with sort of like the .NET C# ecosystem in some way. And there's also some magic way where you can actually hit like iOS and Android APIs. And I think the last thing on my list of things I know is that there is something called Xamarin Forms, which tries to make you able to do cross-platform things so that you don't have to like know Android and iOS specifics. But that's about it.
No, that's pretty good. Actually, before we start, why don't we maybe take a step back and hang on. I might use some visual aid. So forgive me, Internet, for bringing up PowerPoint. Jesus. But I wanted to show you a graphic. Where is it? So I do this talk on like state of mobile dev. I talk mostly .NET. I talk some JavaScript. I know just enough JavaScript to be dangerous, but I wanted to bring you into like where exactly we fit with Xamarin in the picture. So where is it? So I'm going
I don't think you have enough. You need more PowerPoint files on your machine. I think that's the problem.
Yeah. All right. So essentially, this is my like 2-minute spiel when I'm talking about all things mobile. There are multiple ways in which one can hit the mobile form factor. It doesn't always need to be an app. And it's actually good to have TJ on learning Xamarin because he spends a lot of time in the mobile space. He has in the last like 5-6 years. So definitely, if you are interested in web technologies, go all in. There is a lot of love. There is mobile web frameworks you can build out. You can build a PWA to make it a good citizen. You can obviously go native. Hybrid may be questionable nowadays because like with the same tech, you can build JavaScript native apps which are totally native. And so we are in the cross-compiled zone here. We are trying to write .NET stuff and yet build native apps. So this is where we fit in the overall picture. That's Xamarin. And then in terms of the .NET ecosystem, I wanted to bring up this slide. So what do you know about .NET Framework, TJ?
Almost nothing. I think it uses C# as a language.
It's one of the languages. Yeah.
Visual Studio involved.
So,
okay.
so .NET Framework is like, think of it as a gigantic base class library. Lots of libraries, lots of classes that abstract away all of the platform-specific things. And essentially, it lets you write higher level languages that do lower level things. So when you compile a .NET Framework, this purple box, this has been around for like 15, 17 years now. And it does a lot of the heavy lifting, and you're able to run web, desktop applications, everything. But this was on Windows. So right around when .NET Framework first came along, you see the Xamarin piece here. This is the overall .NET story from Microsoft, and this is evolving. There will be a unification of .NET, but essentially there's a framework called Mono. And this is what fires or powers Xamarin Dev. So this is an open source framework started by lots of smart people, including Miguel de Casa, who's still with Xamarin. So this one is an open source cross-platform framework, which essentially takes .NET outside of Windows and lets it run on Linux and Unix and other platforms, right? So this essentially takes all the .NET APIs, runs it on other things, which is what makes .NET code be able to run outside of Windows. And that's exactly what Xamarin is doing today, which is this piece of the puzzle. So with Xamarin, you can write .NET and you can target any platform. So let me get out of this for a second. Okay.
Well, when you say, so while you're doing that, when you say .NET framework is multiple languages, I don't think I totally follow. Then like what, like in terms of software, what is the .NET framework though? Because I thought in my head it was a bunch of like C# APIs, more or less.
So yes and no. So .NET Framework is a bunch of classes, a bunch of things that do platform-specific things on Windows, and then they can do other things on other platforms. But what you're looking at is the topmost layer of the stack. That's the language, and you can do C#, you can do VB, you can do F#. There are a few other languages. So at runtime, all of that gets compiled down into kind of an intermediate thing called IL, or intermediate language, and then it comes down to the lowest bits to be able to run on Windows. And that's what Mono does. It makes your IL code run on Linux or excuse me, on Linux or Unix and other platforms. So essentially, when you say .NET has nothing to do with just C#. C# is the topmost abstraction. It's the language that we write our code in. Does it make sense?
Okay. Yeah, more or less.
And we can talk more about this as we go along. But essentially, Xamarin, everything that you see today, it is running on Mono. And some things will evolve. Mono used to be open source, and then it's got a very large API canvas. It can do almost everything that .NET does. So .NET Framework used to be like one gigantic system-wide installation. That has changed a little bit in the last 5 years. We have .NET Core, which is lean and it's modular, it's cross-platform. So they've broken up .NET into smaller pieces, and they have also updated the runtime so we can run on other platforms. So .NET isn't that gigantic thing anymore. But Mono is it's the abstraction that takes your .NET code outside of just Windows, and it's got a very mature API canvas, and it actually used to do a lot of things that .NET could not do. So since .NET has been open sourced, there's been a lot of like overlap. So Mono has taken some things from .NET and vice versa. So we're in a good place. So
Okay.
if you are to do Xamarin, this is kind of where you will start. Everybody will start here. You can do a search, and this is where you land. This is the landing page for all things Xamarin from Microsoft. So you are right in a lot of things. Essentially, we are the cross-compiled piece of the puzzle when it comes to mobile, and you are wanting to write .NET code and yet at runtime be able to run it as native mobile apps. So you can learn a lot of things, and one of the things that Microsoft did really spend a lot of time is their docs, and the community helps out big time. This is all open source. They have a wonderful platform to write docs, so I encourage anybody to just kind of start reading up here. The thing that you talked about is what are the different types of Xamarin, because there is multiple. So you see that little drop down here. So essentially, when we first started Xamarin, and by we I mean people much smarter than me, the concept was we're going to write an abstracted base class that's going to be in .NET or C#, and then we're going to share it between Android and iOS, right? This was back like when they were called like Mono Touch or Mono Android, and the thing was you still had to write the iOS or the Android app. And so essentially the head of the app, the UI layer, you're writing it as you are writing, as if you're writing a native app, which was great, but it's a step in the right direction. You're writing some C# code for your business logic, but again, like .NET developers, we don't want to we don't want to learn a lot of Android or iOS, and that's when this cross-platform story came along. This is what's called Xamarin Forms, essentially. So it's an abstraction that doesn't just let you run C#, but it also lets you write an abstracted UI layer that at runtime gets translated into native UI for each platform. Make sense?
Yeah, and I'm guessing the actual tools you use are kind of the same regardless of which of those options you want to take.
Pretty much, yes. You can do Visual
Okay.
Studio on Windows. You can do Visual Studio on a Mac. So it's actually fun to have TJ on here because TJ spent a lot of time with NativeScript. And let me bring that up. So NativeScript is an open source framework that lets you write JavaScript native apps. So, and I think Xamarin and NativeScript are actually incredibly similar. With NativeScript, you write JavaScript or TypeScript, or maybe you write Angular, maybe you write Vue, and you're writing JavaScript code, but at runtime you're rendering native stuff. Is that accurate?
Yep, yeah, like that. They're both actual native apps at runtime. So I think if you were just to get an app off the App Store, you wouldn't be able to tell if it was NativeScript or Xamarin
Exactly.
when you're actually looking at the app itself. But the development experience, like we've never, to be honest with you, we never saw Xamarin as a real big competitor for us at
No,
NativeScript,
it's
just
different. Yep.
because NativeScript is very much about embracing everything about the JavaScript ecosystem. Whereas what we've seen, and Sam, you can probably tell me if this is accurate, is that Xamarin try to embraces the very best of the .NET and the C# ecosystem.
Yes. Yeah. So you might have a lot of different ways to build for mobile. It's actually mind-boggling how many options you have. But to me, it's actually somewhat clear. Like, do you want to do .NET? Then you go down the Xamarin path. Do you want to do JavaScript and yet write like native apps? Then you go down NativeScript or React Native. So it's like the fork in the road is, what do you want to do? Do you want to write .NET or do you want to write JavaScript? Right, so it's actually good to have you because you have done a lot of NativeScript for years now, so you will actually draw parallels between a lot of things that NativeScript does and Xamarin does. So I have always actually enjoyed the way the Xamarin team has defined what is a native app, because like that thing itself is, it's complicated, right? What do you call a native app? So they have always said like there are three things that make an app native. Do you have native UI? Do you have access to native APIs? And do you have native performance, right? I think those are the kind of the three pillars that make a native app today. Some of it may be a little open to like,
So yeah, a little bit of gray area,
little gray areas,
but
yeah. Yeah, like what like Flutter does, like it may not be absolutely native, like especially on iOS in terms of the UI stack, but it's fast and you got native API access, so why not, right? So that's where we are at. So any other architectural things before we start?
no, I kind of want to see Xamarin in action a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
I want to dig in.
So you are going to have to really push me hard to build Xamarin iOS or Xamarin Android now. And this, mind you, is the way of doing things where you're writing the native heads separately. I almost always advise nowadays to start with the cross-platform story. Start with Xamarin Forms. The nice thing is, if you find that you're writing a Xamarin Forms application, which is an abstraction, and you somehow don't have a way to do something in iOS or in Android, you can always step down and write native code. You can embed like a native UI. So there's nothing stopping you from stepping down into native land. So this is where I almost always start nowadays. So there are multiple ways in which you can actually write Xamarin Forms code. The application does quite a bit out of the box. What you're writing, essentially, the UI stack is C# and XAML. XAML is a markup language. It's lightweight. And this is kind of what in the chat room Brian was talking about. Excuse me. There is a design pattern called model view Viewmodel that's heavily used for anything that's C# and XAML type code base. It's declarative user interface, or you can define it all in code. So essentially, you're building up a visual tree, just like what you do with NativeScript or React Native. It's not an HTML visual tree. It's a XAML visual tree. And at runtime, every one of those elements get transformed and rendered as a native UI element. And that's why we have things called renderers, which will take your generic button and render an iOS button or an Android button. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so this is where I'll start, and let's open up docs here and just keep that up open, because this is really, really good. Like I said, they have worked a lot trying to make this as painless as possible. So there's a lot of good stuff here. Now, in terms of tooling, unfortunately, we are not as cool as you guys. We don't just like get an ID and start coding. Who does that? So we like some drama. We like some like fluff before we start. So you have to get some tools. And this is where it's tricky, because what you're doing is a little heavy-handed. So essentially, you need to get Visual Studio on Windows or on Mac. So let me pull up my Visual Studio here.
Yeah, and while you're doing that, I remember so back when I was on the NativeScript team, one of the things we did is we tried out um, all of these other mobile solutions that are out there, and I remember I tried Xamarin probably, God, 3-4 years ago, and what I remember is that basically if you have nothing set up, like your first step is like a 9 GB of downloads, something
Yeah, yeah.
like just downloading an absolute crap ton of stuff. Is that still the case?
Um, in a way, yes, because part of it is like if you have a brand new machine, you just don't have any of the bits. And what Xamarin does behind the scenes is build you a real native app. So they will go, if you don't have it, they will go and get the iOS SDKs, which include Xcode and all of the tooling, and Android SDKs and Android virtual machines for the simulators. So it is a big download, but they have worked on this. Visual Studio 2017 used to be super bad about this. It was like a 9 gig install. Nowadays, with 2019 and then even moving forward, they have this concept of like workflows. So if you are on a brand new machine, if you're just getting Visual Studio, you can just get the mobile workflow, and that only gives you
Okay.
Xamarin.
Yeah, because I remember like it was downloading like all these like C++ toolkits for like 15, 20 minutes, and I'm looking at it going, what are you doing? Why do I need this?
Yeah, yeah. Some of it is just dependencies, and again, they have worked on this. I don't think it's as big as 9 gigs, but there are some moving pieces. Because this is another question we get a lot. Like, do you have to have a Mac to build a Xamarin application for iOS? And the answer is yes and no. It is a native app, so you are going to use Xcode to actually do the build for you. But it doesn't need to be anything that you ever need to see. So it doesn't actually need to be a Mac that you're on. It could be something on your network. People use things like machinthecloud.com. Visual Studio has a service where they can do the iOS builds. So somehow you need to do a build, and that's where some of the tooling comes in.
Yeah, and I will say that the one thing about Xamarin I actually liked when I tried it out is that so with NativeScript, the starting path is a lot simpler in terms of there's less to download and set up, but we also expected people to do a lot of the native stuff sort of on their own, like install Xcode separately and all this other stuff. So we actually had problems with like a lot of support requests of like I can't get NativeScript apps up and running,
Right.
whereas with Xamarin, I had to do this ridiculously long setup process, but things did just
Yeah,
work
yeah.
once I got
That's
everything
the
sort of
point. Like
installed,
they'll
which was actually kind of
yeah
nice.
they'll get you everything that you need to get started, but it's a one time big install. And the thing is like Apple and Google are pushing out updates to their SDKs, right? So this is kind of the reality of modern day mobile dev. You kind of have to get your bits in line and keep updating stuff, because otherwise it just falls out of sync. Like Visual Studio may be wanting to use some features that you just don't have in your SDK, and that's not a fun thing.
Yep.
Okay, so we have been talking for like 20 minutes and I haven't even started coding. That's bad. Let's start. So in Visual Studio, since I have the mobile tools installed, I see some things light up when I start a new project. So notice how I can build a native iOS app. This is what this is what's called like Xamarin iOS, where you get to write some C#, but the UI is native. And same with Android, you can also do watch, you can also do TV, so all the fun stuff. But then this multi-platform thing is the one that I use the most. Like I said, I like Xamarin Forms. So this is where you start. So is it, you get a few choices of the type of things you can put in. Type of, like every mobile app is a collection of pages essentially. So what type of page do you want? Is it just a simple blank, master detail, tabbed, shell, which we can talk about. So let's start with a blank page and see what that works. So let's call it Xamarin 101. I can actually skip Android just to
Now,
kind of keep our project light. Sorry, were you saying something?
and just a quick question. If you go cross-platform, I'm assuming you still have some ability to do platform-specific
Yeah,
stuff.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Now, one thing
okay.
you actually do not see, since I'm on a Mac, is on the target platforms, you don't see Windows. And by Windows, I mean this thing called Universal Windows Platform. It's complicated to explain, but essentially it's Windows apps that you can pull up on your Windows tablets or desktops. It's the apps that you go get from the store, essentially. And you can build those apps right from Xamarin itself, but I cannot because I'm not on Windows. But what I can do is once we create this project, if I'm on a Mac and you're on a Windows, you can pull up this same project in Visual Studio on a Windows and you can add the Windows project to it, essentially.
Oh, interesting. So like if the app is in source control, Windows and Mac people could work
totally.
side
It's the
by
exact
side.
same project structure, configuration, everything is the same.
Is this might be more of a taking a step back question, but source control in like the .NET world is Git the sort of expected path? Is like, are there other, like, what's the landscape there?
So you can do pretty much everything. You can do Git. A lot of the Microsoft things happen in GitHub because it's open source and Microsoft actually owns it.
It's true.
So you can do whatever source control you want, and they can all be terminal, or the GitHub stuff is actually nicely baked inside of Visual Studio through like visual tools. So there's nothing much you have to do.
Okay.
All right, so it's spinning up my project. It's going a little slow because my machine is a little taxed at this moment, but essentially this is what it does when you spin up a new project. So you see the project structure here. So I have this project and then I have an iOS project. So this is kind of what you were asking. Every time you create a new Xamarin Forms project, you get these platform-specific projects. I only have one here, and I can actually show you other demos where I have a Mac project, I have an Android project, I have a Windows project. So all of the platform-specific stuff goes right there, right? So if you have like splash screens, or if you have anything specific to iOS, that needs to go in the iOS folder, because that's how Xamarin will do the build. It's going to grab stuff out of the iOS folder for iOS. And then this project here is the one that you want to do, because this is what's called a .NET standard. So it's a specification. So I can actually take this project and I can use it from a desktop application or like a web application. I can use some of the business logic. I can reuse that because this is generic enough. It's following a spec. And essentially, you want to do almost everything that you can in the common shared project. So you're not writing iOS or Android specific things. Does that make sense, TJ?
It does. Ed
Yeah.
just dropped by in the chat too. So hey, Ed.
Hello, Ed.
Feel free to join in on grilling Sam here on Xamarin stuff.
So Ed is actually our teammate, and he is his middle name is Blazor because he does all things Blazor. So Ed, we're not doing Blazor, but actually I can try showing this a little bit. There is a way of so Blazor is a new framework for writing web applications, both server-side and client-side, with .NET and running it native. It's getting a lot of love for good reasons, and there is a way actually to write the UI layer of Xamarin Forms through Blazor, and I can show you that a little bit. Okay, so once you do this, it's doing a few things. It's pulling down some dependencies, and then when we do a build, let's do a build all. So at this point, you will have a working project where it's an iOS project, but it doesn't have anything iOS specific things. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And since I'm on a Mac, it automatically knows, like Visual Studio knows that there's an Xcode that is installed. It's found the command line tools. It knows how to do the build. So I actually don't even have to open up Xcode or see anything. It's actually real nice. Did your window move? No, I think you'll come back on. Your video just shrunk a little bit, so I'll keep an eye on.
Yeah, so it's been doing that a little bit throughout the stream, and actually I don't know if you can kill things in the background, but the stream was a little bit choppy, and then when you started up in Visual Studio, I've got a spinner now on the live stream.
Okay.
So I don't know if you have any ability to kill things to free up some resources.
I'm not running much. Yeah, I'm not running much at all. I did kill all of the stuff that I could kill.
Okay.
All right, let's keep on going. Could be just a Wi-Fi bleep on my side.
Yep.
All right, so let's go ahead and run this, and then we'll talk about what happens behind the scenes. So as you can see, I can just simply say run, and it will do the build. And notice what it's doing. It's actually talking to Xcode right now, and we're not seeing this. And hopefully the simulator comes along nicely on the stream. Oh, it's actually running the latest bits. I'm sorry, this is 13.4 with iOS. So I just got some latest bits, because why not? Like before you do a talk, you should always go and install the latest bits.
It's the best way to do live demos. I didn't even know. It is cool though that Xamarin. So when you say get the latest bits too, you're getting them from Visual Studio, right, and not from
Yes, yes.
Xcode. So that's interesting
Yeah,
because like with
yeah.
native script, we'd always have people go to Xcode to grab these things, right, or the Mac OS apps store to get the latest version of Xcode. We wouldn't handle installing any of
Yeah,
that stuff for
so
you.
.NET developers, we are known to be lazy, so we like getting everything out of the box. Okay, so folks in the chat room, I see some familiar faces. Imril Demir, hey, hello, hello, and the Tigor, I'm going to call you. So, yeah, I see the video being a little choppy. I don't know if what else I can do. My network seems to be okay. So I see the stream catch up on us a little bit. I see TJ, I see the simulator. Hopefully that works. So we'll see. Okay, so it is trying to do a build, and this is the iOS simulator, and you'll see in a second. It says welcome to Xamarin Forms, right? So essentially we did a build and we ran it without actually knowing what the heck it did for us, right? So let's actually step into this. Essentially what you're seeing here is a couple of things, and let me open up the internal guts of this project. So like I said, this is Xamarin Forms, so it's C# and XAML as the UI stack. In here is an app.xaml file, which essentially is a bunch of resources. Anything you want to pull in, it's a app level project or file. And then in here is also a CS file, which is a C# file. And this actually controls a couple of things in your app. So we have this concept of an app lifecycle. You get three methods right out of the gate, like on start, on sleep, and on resume. So if your app is running when it's first starting up, if you had to go fetch some data or like hydrate some objects, you do it on the on start. If your app goes in the background where the user just switches up to a different app, you will get an immediate notification on sleep. And this is your chance to go and save some state if you wanted to, and then you get an on resume where the app comes back out in the foreground, and you can rehydrate stuff as you need to. You actually do not get a notification if your app is killed, right? So if at some point, like when you're running your app, your OS might just think that this app is just sitting out there for days and days and I need more resources. So when the OS kills your app, you will not get a notification. So this is one of the gotchas. So anytime you have to save any state, do it on sleep, right? I think like NativeScript has a similar concept to this, right?
Yeah, there's definitely it's eerily similar just because there's an app.js file and there's like an application module and there's different events you can subscribe to that are essentially the same thing.
Yeah.
So
I
think it's sort of inherent to mobile development. You're going to need to do stuff like this.
Yes. So in the chat room, Emerald Demir is saying it looks similar to like global ASX. So yes, if you are doing ASP.NET type web development on .NET, you will have global configuration files. That's what these things are. So I get a config to pull in some resources if I need to. There's some assembly stuff and other things, but essentially you see this one line of code. Let me bump up my fonts a little bit. Okay, so you see that main page. This is kind of a key thing to understand, that this is where your app starts out. So the thing that we just saw, welcome to Xamarin Forms, that is the first page of our app, and that's actually not in the iOS project, obviously. That is right here in the shared projects, because we want to share that UI in between iOS and Android. So if I open up this XAML thing here, you're going to see some XAML, which gets a little verbose. There are XAML lovers, lots of us, but we can see that it gets a little verbose, but it's not difficult to understand. Essentially, this one is just putting a content page, and it's putting a stack layout. These are the things that we use to build our visual tree, and it's putting a label inside that says welcome to Xamarin Forms, and that's what you see in iOS or Android. So let me go on.
I'm curious how the delegation of control happens there. Like, so in your app.xaml.cs file, what tells, because I'm assuming that app file is the first thing that runs. Yes. What tells it that main page should be the thing to render? Because it looks like all it's doing is instantiating a main page. It's right
here, but then in the iOS project, you're going to have an app delegate. So this is what tells it to go do its stuff. So in here, when iOS is starting up, we have to have this Xamarin Forms.init. this is what initializes the whole Xamarin Forms framework, and we pass on this app to the load application thing. So there is some voodoo magic, obviously, under the scenes. We are saying go like load up this thing and don't draw anything that iOS is used to drawing. Just don't do that. Just let Xamarin Form paint the whole page, and that is the app that's running. If that makes sense.
How often do you have to get into this stuff? Because this looks like some not fun stuff to be in right now.
Not often at all. In fact, you don't even need to look at it. And essentially, we come back and we just call finish launching because this is something that iOS needs. But that's it. You never have to look at it. So this 3 lines of code, it already wires up everything you need, and you get a canvas, which is the whole app canvas to paint whatever you want. Make sense?
So in terms of like, yeah, it does. In terms of like routing, like if I wanted to say switch from one page to another, like we don't have to code that right now, but like where would that code go? Would you typically put that in like the cross-platform stuff?
Yeah. Or? So let me close this down. So your goal is to not do anything in iOS or Android, right? Your goal is to do everything in the shared project. So you can add any number of pages here. We can talk about navigation between the pages. Everything stays in the shared project as long as you can. There are some things that may be like iOS or Android specific, like if you want to do like SQLite that has like separate things in iOS or Android, or if you want to do like images that are specific to iOS or Android, that's the stuff you put in the project. But otherwise, everything stays up here. Let me show you one more thing before we get started, and I'm going to be the grandpa who pulls up PowerPoint again because I want a visual. And I don't see this nicely done or as nice of a visual in some of the documentation. So I'm going to pull up something that I have always used for the last like 5 years. So
if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, it works for me. It helps me explain something. All right. So just to kind of recap, this is kind of what we talked about. This is the traditional like iOS or Android. See how we said we're going to write the heads separately? This is the native, like Xamarin native is what it's called. And what we are doing right now is Xamarin Forms, where you have the shared UI code, which is incredibly difficult because, as you know, like these are 3 very different platforms. So you still have a little bit of the purple and the green because you do have to know a little bit of the native stuff sometimes. But for the most part, you can stay away from it. All right, so what am I looking for? Is it not here? Oh no, maybe I don't have it here. I was trying to show you a graphic of all the ways we lay things out. Okay, maybe not, but I will talk about it in Xamarin Essentials in just a second. So let me close this down. Let's go to docs and I'll show you what is it that I'm talking about. And like I said, like the docs are really, really good. So if I go in here, Xamarin docs, let's look at user interface stuff. So to controls reference overview. So this is kind of how we build up the visual tree as to what makes up our app. So out of the gate, you have this concept of pages and layouts and views. And I don't know if this is a little too small, but you can see what's being suggested here. So there are these containers that you put your stuff inside. This is what makes up a page in Xamarin Forms. So you can have a content page, you can have a master detail thing, you can have a navigation page, tabbed page. So you get like a choice of 4 or 5 different pages. That makes sense?
Yep.
And inside the pages, what you put is these things called layouts, right? And this is again a placeholder, so you can put the smaller stuff, visuals in it, and it just helps with the visual tree. You get a content view, you get a scroll view. The ones that we use a lot are stacks and grids. You also have an absolute layout, which you don't want to use that unless you are like targeting just a specific device with known like pixels. But otherwise, like the flexible layout, this is what gives your visual tree the structure. And inside of that layout is where you put all the other stuff. So you can see some of the documentation. There are probably about 30 or so controls that are built in Xamarin Forms. These are all abstractions. So when I say a label, it renders as a native label on iOS, a native label on Android, and so on. So you can go through this long list of controls that you can throw on, and they will all be native.
Yeah, it's funny how much of this is similar to native script because we had a lot of the same layouts. And I think we used to recommend like absolute layout. The only time it really makes sense is like Actually, the only time I remember ever using it is like if you need the like material design button that's always going to be in like the bottom right corner of the screen sort of thing. Like that can be an absolute layout because regardless of device, whatever, you always want it sort of docked there in the bottom.
Right.
But like you said, it's like stacks and grids are like 97% of what you'll ever write.
Sure. Okay, so you get a lot of these UI things out of the box, and then maybe that's not all. This is where the community comes in. I'm going to be obviously biased towards our stuff, but let me show you a little bit of what's possible. So everybody in the community and companies have stepped up to provide UI for Xamarin, so you are not stuck to just those like 30 or so things you get. So this is our offering. This is Telerik UI for Xamarin. So you get the idea. So for Xamarin iOS, Xamarin Android, we have the same controls. So Xamarin Forms, these are probably 30 or 40 other controls that you can throw in, and they're all abstracted. They all are native at runtime. So you're not limited to just to the Xamarin things that you get out of the box. But again, we're not the only ones who make stuff like this. So go check out everybody else who makes UI. Don't recreate the wheel because there's a lot of help.
Ed is saying on the web everything is a div, which is true, but there are many types of divs. Ed.
Yes.
Yeah, and Ivana said my video is small. Yeah, for some reason OBS wants to like make me small and then big, and sometimes the software like I fix myself. So
Yeah.
it is
Let me go.
different
Let me
sizes.
go meta for just a second and check what's going on, because I see you're small. All right, hang on.
It's been doing this on and off.
Yeah.
But it's been fixing itself.
Yeah.
So
How about I make you a little bigger? How about that?
yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well.
Although what's going to be hilarious is if it like unfixes itself again and then like I take up the whole screen. That'd be
Okay.
kind of awesome.
Well, it looks like you got a little bigger on the
That's
screen.
right.
Okay. Why are you so mean? Obviously, Ivana is our colleague. She does a whole bunch of stuff for us, and she always loves to hang out with us. So thank you for taking the time to hang out with us, Ivana.
I mean, Sam, if you want to make me like take up a whole like third of the screen and make me like just like and like face me so I'm just looking down on you and judging you the entire time, like 3D rotate me a little bit, that could also work.
Yeah. Okay, so back to our app, right? So this is our one page. Let's see, let's watch our time. Maybe we can do another 20, 25 minutes or so. Let's try at least getting something done, right? Because we have been talking, which was important. Like we are trying to set a foundation for Xamarin, but let's actually do stuff, and then maybe next week I can show you styles, I can show you data binding, all the fun stuff. But let's start. So this one here, you can see it's a stack layout. So I was thinking, like, one of the most common things that mobile apps do is show you a list of things, right? It's one of the most common things we do. So that's kind of like the hello world, like the 101 of building mobile apps. You pull down some data and you show it. So how would you do it? So I was looking around for some help for getting a free RESTful API service, and I actually found this guy to play around with. I don't know if you've seen this. I mean, there are plenty of RESTful things we can pull up, like cat pictures. This one's pretty simple, and it is just showing you, let's say, let's go to albums here. You get some JSON back from this. If my Wi-Fi
This is actually,
yeah, it's fairly good. It's like full CRUD, and you can submit to it if it comes up.
photos.
Yeah,
I'll have to,
so it's
I'll have
just
to
like,
remember this
yeah.
because for demos and such,
Yeah,
this is
exactly.
actually pretty good to do.
And it's actually in Latin, so that makes it fun. So this one just has titles. Maybe let's try getting something that's a little more than a title. On albums is the one that I looked at. So let's go look at posts. So this one has like a title and a body. So what if we wanted to pull down this stuff from the web and show it to us in a Xamarin app, right? So let's do that. So this one has like an ID and a title and a body. So kind of the default way of doing this is creating stuff that mimics the data that you want to pull in, because then there's some help in terms of data binding and how things work. So let me go in here and actually add a new thing. Let's do add a new class. And what was it that we were looking at? We were looking at posts, right? So let's create an empty class called posts. new. So this will be just a C# class. There is nothing going on in it.
Now, you mentioned the .NET framework is multiple languages. Does Xamarin imply multiple languages, or is everything for sure C#?
Oh boy, this is opening up a can of worms. Let me just say it's C#. Yes, you can do a few other things like F#, but it's not very popular. It's really for the nerdiest of us who want to do F#, but it's
So
mostly
is that
C#.
but like 95+% of people just write C#
Yes,
though,
pretty much.
presumably.
Pretty much. All right, so where is, hang on, where is my mouse pointer now? Okay, so in here, I want to write a few things. So let's do, what was it like this? Is it a string? Looks like a string. So let's come back in here. Let's call this a string of the type title. And this is C# sugar, just a shortcut way of setting that property, essentially.
Is the namespace thing required? That seems like some like unnecessary.
It just assumes the thing that your project is in. So we are in a project Xamarin 101. It's not essential. I mean, you can call it whatever. It's just a namespace. Why am I getting a curly brace expected where? What did I take off? This is nuts. All right, let's do build.
I can't help because I don't know where semicolons are supposed to go in here, or braces. It looks like all your braces match. The get set thing is interesting.
It's just
I've never seen that before.
Property. In the chat room, Ed is saying you can use F# and VB based libraries as a reference. Yes, you can. I don't think you can write VB, but you can write F# with Xamarin. Ed, my dear, what am I missing? I just literally wrote one line of code in Visual Studio saying, you're not right.
Is that a constructor, the public post there?
Yes.
Okay. It's interesting that most languages would just say like constructor there. Can you define like multiple constructors in C#?
Yeah, absolutely, and you can pass things in.
Oh, you're writing in the constructor. Shouldn't that be a separate function?
Yes.
Or
yes. I'm sorry. That's why.
Okay.
That's why it's complaining. What is this thing? Nope. That's not what I want. Hang on. I cannot type today.
Gotcha. So that should be a separate. Basically, you're saying posts have a title property that should have a getter and a setter.
So that's what I was missing. So I was writing inside. Ed is finally like, you need to be outside that method. Yes. All right. So what else did we get? We were going to get a body, right? So that's also going to be a string, right? And we can copy paste. So essentially, I'm trying to mimic something that will come down, so I can deal with this and I can keep it local. And there are multiple.
Now, this is super trivial, but uppercase, like is that normal? I would always think to do it lowercase.
It depends. So actually, that's a good point. So we can actually call it whatever. And I think if I have this right, I may have to bring in some namespaces or some references. There is a thing called JSON property, I think, and.
Oh man, it says property is uppercase, field is lowercase, and now I have to ask what's the difference between a property and a field?
A field is usually private to that class, so the kind of the single responsibility thing, while a property is normally exposed out.
That's interesting. In JavaScript, there would be no difference there. JavaScript's the Wild West, though.
It is. So I'm trying to show you something, and it doesn't like. I think I just need to use not do any of that. So what am I missing?
What is this syntax? Is this like a decorator?
No, actually, you know what?
I'm making up words.
No, it's missing something that I'm using. So let me actually show this to you so you see. So we have this thing called Nougat, right? This is our NPM, just much more well-behaved. Ivana is giving us some tough love in the chat room. Yes. Yeah, Ed is meant for tough love. So this is our NPM. This is where we go and get our dependencies, and it's just a little more well-behaved than NPM. We still have issues. But that is getting out Nougat that I needed, and I was trying to use it without actually having it. So now I can do newtonsoft.json because we are dealing with JSON. So that's just a Nougat package that helps. And now I have this thing called the JSON property. So we can give it a property name, I think is the syntax, and then so this is where I can actually match it to what's coming down from my source, right? So that, and
So it says what am I looking for? I can't remember the name, but this like square brackets are compiler directives.
they are. So essentially, it's a way of decorating that property to have some extra stuff. Like think of it like an adjective that describes the property.
So basically, like the compiler is going to generate some code essentially for you, so that you don't have to write it manually to like presumably deal with like JSON parsing or something.
Yes, so we brought in a package, like you saw the dependencies that come in. That's our package to do JSON serialization and deserialization, which is this guy, newtonsoft.json. So what
Okay.
that does is it's kind of a mapping to say when you see a thing called body come in, put it in that property called body, if that makes sense.
Does C# have a concept of decorators? Because like that's almost how like Java has something similar, but they call them decorators with the @ sign, and then like Angular sort of borrowed that from the Java world.
Um, it's not a one-on-one thing. We can have attributes that describe a class or a property, and these attributes can mean different things to the compiler.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I'm not answering what the corresponding @ thing is in Java.
It sounds like this is somewhat similar just by looking at it. We do have a question from Smeb UK, if I'm pronouncing it right, not using system.text.json.
Yeah, sorry, I could have done that. So essentially, what he or she is referring to is JSON handling and how you serialize and deserialize and how you hydrate and dehydrate your objects. So you don't actually have to do what I did. For the longest time, .NET did not do a very good job of JSON parsing. So we depended on that library called Newtonsoft JSON. It's like the #1 biggest downloaded library of all times in the .NET world, but actually they have brought in JSON parsing within .NET now, so you don't have to depend on it as much.
Okay, another question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to make sure you don't actually code anything today. Do these packages you bring in have an adverse effect on like performance? Like, do you have to be careful with that sort of thing, or
yes,
in this case?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
in a way, yes, and especially for Xamarin because this is mobile and you want to be conscious of the app size. So there is some smartness built in some of the Nougat packages in particular, where if you bring in, like, let's just say our stuff, like if you bring in Telerik UI for Xamarin, which is a big package because it has all of our UI, and then if you just use like one piece of control, we will do some tree shaking, kind of what like Angular or React will do. So we will only put the stuff that needs to go in your app package. And it's the same thing with other Nougat packages. They can all be similar or they can all be smart, but yes, they're all in that project and they're on a per project basis. This is what we were talking about the other day, where it is not quite like the Node modules, where it's like half the internet on your hard drive, but this is still so on Windows machines you particularly have this concept of a global assembly cache where you can share some of the dependencies between projects, but overall when you bring it in, it is a dependency that your project is taking, and then when you build the project, the executables, the runtime has only the pieces that you need. That makes sense?
Gotcha. Yep.
All right, so we have probably another 15 minutes or so to spend. Ed is saying more things about C#. Yes, capitalization as long as the name is the same. Yes. Okay, so let's open up main page.xaml.cs because this is where we're going to write our stuff. I'm going to knock out some of these things that we don't need. Okay, so in here, I am going to create something that, let's see, I have a generic. Okay. Let me create a list, right? And we can make it public.
There are a lot of unused imports there at the top.
Yeah, which I can clear up.
It's weird that it puts them in there though, unless like they expect you to be using them.
Right. Now you can take it off. Hang on. That. All right. So I'm sure in NativeScript you'll have a corresponding similar thing, but take a look at what I'm trying to build here. So I have a class that kind of represents my posts, right, coming in. So I can say posts. So I'm essentially creating a list.
And is the term for the angle brackets there? Is that generics? Like,
Yes,
are you saying a collection
exactly.
of?
So essentially, it's an array. It's a collection of posts that I want to deal with because that's what I'm going to come back with from the internet. And then this one is a special type of collection. This is one that lets me do two-way data binding. So I can let's see in the chat room. Smab UK is saying they're very common but easy to remove. Yeah, I think he or she's talking to Ed. This is one that lets me bind some data to my UI, and then if the data object collection changes, I don't have to keep updating the UI over and over again, and the same like vice versa.
Okay,
that makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to do everything right here without actually going into any kind of architecture. We're just going to code everything right here, right? Because why not? So let's do it right here. So in here, this is where my first page is starting up. So let's see, what do I need? Oh, I do need an HTTP collection or a thing to pull down the stuff. I think it's called HTTP client.
And Ed's saying that the list type is very similar to Java, and I agree. Actually, so I wrote Java code for like 5 years, and a lot of this is giving me like flashbacks to my Java days.
Okay, so we have an HTTP client, so we can actually make a call, and this is where we kind of have to do a little bit of async and await because we don't want to lock up the main UI thread. Ed is talking about stuff.
Salesforce.
All right, Ed, you keep giving me love. I'm going to try to finish this one bit in the next 15 minutes. All right, let's actually write a method that we can call. All right, so I'm going to call it async, and we are going to return a task of the type that observable collection, right?
Is that like the syntax on line 13? Are you saying main page like extends content page more or less?
Yeah. It is.
Oh my
it is
God.
a main page of the type content page, which maybe next week I'll show you. Like, it doesn't need to be a content page. It can be a navigation page. It can be a tabbed page. It can be anything.
I'm just this is just more like this is Java.
Don't say that. That breaks our hearts.
Oh no, but it's so similar, Sam.
Okay, so let's just create response. Okay, this is where we are going to do an await. So the async and await is a way of like thread management. So we are passing this off to a thread to say, go to the call. When you come back, don't mess with our UI thread. Just merge the results back in when you have it.
So JavaScript is getting async await. Did they take it from C#? Did C# have it first?
We did have it first. Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, so get async. So this is our primary get, right? And this is where I'm going to be super creepy because I am going to hard code my URL. No, please don't do this. Go get it from a constants file or something. All right, right there, right? So we're going to make a get call over there, and what else do we want to do? I think well, we can do a check. I think if what's the syntax? See, most of our coding is copy and paste. So I'm trying to. Oh, there you go. Is status code good? Which means it succeeded, and we're not going to do any error handling whatsoever. So let's do a var of content.
Yeah, and it's saying in the chat Java with less steps, and I get that too. Actually, line 28, like the var keyword, I didn't know that existed in C#, but it's kind of nice. So like in Java, when you declare variables, you have to like always give them a type, and it comes with some headaches. So this is like a little bit cleaner.
Yeah. Okay. I think so. This is where we are literally reading the response as a string, because I don't care. It's going to be JSON. So I think the reason why we did that thing is I can actually use the JSON serialization that's built in. What's it called? Json Convert. No?
SMAB UK is not a fan of var in general.
No.
Are there like other ways of
Yeah.
doing
So
variables?
what's been referred to is this is dynamic. So var is dynamic. It's kind of what JavaScript does. So you want things to be typed right. So it's a strongly typed class as compared to a var can be anything, right?
Yep.
So that's what. But I mean, when you're just pulling down some data, maybe you don't know what type of data it is, then it's okay to use var. All right, so Newton's of JSON, and again, like what SMAB UK was pointing out, you don't have to use this. You can actually use JSON that's built into .NET now. var adds simplicity to our code. Yes, it adds simplicity, but it maybe it hurts a little bit of the readability because you're not sure what you're reading in. Okay, now I think I should be able to JSON. No, what is it called? JSON Convert. There it is.
You could
Not
be
a converter.
JavaScript and you could have var, let, and const, and you could have very confusing internet articles that tell you which ones you should or should not be using. So they could be worse.
Yeah. Hang on. I'm not typing this right. I do need the deserialize object, but of the type posts. There you go. So we are essentially saying what we are expecting back is going to be an object of that type, which I didn't get all the properties. I'm hoping it's not going to puke on me for just that.
And you said, so this is 2A data binding. So just by assigning like the reference, that's enough to like tell the UI probably that there's new data essentially, or to trigger whatever needs to happen.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Hang on, I'm missing something. That's what I need. All right, and then I need what did I call this thing? It's called content, right? There. Are you happy now? C#? Yes. Yes. Okay. So we're returning this, and we need to return this thing, right? Because otherwise it's not going to be happy.
You need to return something.
Yeah. This collection, my posts. Are you
Do
happy
you
now?
need to return anything from here?
No, not essentially, but this one is returning a task. So it's essentially like so the way I have heard this being described is you're returning an empty envelope with the promise that eventually there's going to be some data there, if that makes sense. You still here, TJ? Okay. All right.
I am still here.
Okay, I got to watch.
The stream paused a little bit for me, but I am still here.
Hopefully it comes back up. Okay. We don't have any UI yet, which we can add later on, but let's see if this will actually work. Just for sanity, I'm going to add two more things because I'm a little concerned that if my object does not exactly match what I'm getting back, it might not like it. So I had the data coming back to me as, hey folks on the stream, sorry, I saw a little spinner wheel. Hopefully you're back to seeing my code. So what I'm going to do is try to match up exactly what the thing would be coming back down from my RESTful call. So let's just call this user ID, and this one we're going to call ID. Okay, so now we have an object that pretty much matches what should be coming back from my JSON thing, so it should not get confused. Okay, so far we have just written C# code. Let's actually fire this up. So I'm not going to receive anything, but if I just do a get posts just to call this, let's see what it does behind the scenes. It's going to say yes, all of that awaitable stuff. But will it compile?
Shall see.
It did compile. It's not liking it because I'm calling this awaitable thing from inside something that is not awaitable. So that's what it's not liking it. But let's try. So put a breakpoint there, fire it up. We don't have any UI to bind to, but I'm just trying to see if I can get any data out of it.
So I'm curious, where will you see this? Because you're not logging anything. Is there like some sort of debug tools that are going to show you like requests that are
Right there,
occurring,
I'm
or?
debugging, right? So I can see stuff. So it hit a debugger.
Oh, I see. You're going to
Yep.
step debug it through. I
And I'm
see.
going to
Okay.
let it go, and eventually it's going to come down here. Okay, so content. So yes, we do have stuff coming back. Now let's see if it will actually be able to deserialize this puppy.
That is actually one really nice. So like with NativeScript, you could step debug in Visual Studio Code, but it was never perfect because it's not like a fully integrative experience like this where you're doing everything in one place. So this is actually
So if
pretty
you can see my
nice.
screen, do you see me editing? So essentially it did deserialize. So I have a collection of posts now in C# code, which matches exactly what came down from the server. And looks like they're limiting it to like 100, which is fine. So I have the things exactly matching it. So here's my collection of 100 posts that just came down. Fancy?
Yep.
All right. Yeah,
Kind of
let's
nice.
watch my time for a little bit. Let's go another 10 minutes and then we'll stop. Let's just do like 101. And this is where I'm going to be lazy because I'm going to do what I always do. And that is pulling down something that I am comfortable with. Folks in this chat room, you don't have to use it, but I like it because I work on it. So this is our Xamarin package. I'm going to pull that guy in. And this essentially fires up all of our UI. And what I'm going to do is just try to show it in a list. So Xamarin does have a list view built in, but ours is kind of more on steroids. So it does more things, which you're not going to see any of that. But I just want a list. And I know there's some code that I can copy. And that's what I'm after. List view, what am I looking for? Yeah, so here's some code where I just want to show a list of things, right? So that's what I was after, so I can copy and paste. So I need some references first.
Are there any like snippets that you can use? Like, is that a
absolutely. You
thing?
can turn on snippets and you can shortcut things, but I'm essentially just trying to copy and paste some stuff. So let's go back in my XAML.
Yep.
And this is my UI tree. This is my visual tree, remember? So now I'm going to add a few more things into it. And I'm going to add these two lines of code. Essentially, these are namespaces that open up to us using our list view, our controls. And then I'm going to go in and copy our list view, which is right here. And instead of a label, we're just going to put the whole, let's get rid of this one. And what's the syntax? Hang on, let me check something. I think we can just say content page dot content. Okay, so this is kind of a placeholder, and in here I'm going to paste this whole thing, which is a list view. Move it over a little bit to the right. Okay. All right, so now let's see what we can knock off. We don't need these local binding contexts. I can give it the binding at runtime once we have our data. So here's a list view, this item source. I don't need that right now. Get rid of that. So I have a data template. I don't need a grid. I can actually, I like a stack. So orientation is going to be, what time is it, TJ? 11:11. All right.
Yeah, it's 11:11. I think you have time to finish up this list.
All right.
I kind of want to see the data.
Yep. All right. So in here, I'm going to put a label, and we need to call it something, or maybe not. Maybe I can just do the text. And see, this is where binding comes in, and we're going to bind to, what was it? We were getting back. Let's do the title, right? So I'm going to bind to the title, which at this point the UI has no idea what the hell a title is because it does not have a data binding, but I just want to do that, right? And at runtime, It's not liking something. What did I do to you? Oh, sorry. This needs to be inside. Nope. Sorry, this guy needs to. If I can type. There we
It's
go.
weird that you have to type the word binding.
Yeah, well, I mean, it did give me IntelliSense to help me out a little bit. So at this point, I've gotten that. So let's see, did I get everything right?
Wouldn't the curly imply binding though? Like that seems weird to me that word. Like, are there other things you can do inside the curly then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the moment you get inside, it's going to talk about all the things you can do. So it's templates,
Yeah.
a lot of binding and other stuff, but yeah.
That is nice though that you get like with native script, you get inside those curlies, no IntelliSense exists because since it's not, fully typed language or anything,
Right.
native script has no idea at that point what's going on. You're just sort of on your own.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, so I'm going to call a method here, say draw UI, because I just don't want to do an async await on the main initializer itself. So I'm going to do it in a different thing. We're going to make it public. All right, so this one is going to be async, and I'm going to return a void, and I'm going to call it draw UI. All right, let me know if the chat room is saying anything because I am trying to finish this, so I'm not looking at it.
No, chat is good. I think we're just anxious to see a list here. The hype is building. Very real.
Like we were talking about this the other day, like how low is our bar? We just want to see some data brought down and working.
No, exactly. No, this has been good though because I mean, I had not seen a lot of this in action. Like, I mean, so much of this is new to me. Just like seeing some of the C# code and like, I didn't even realize async await like was a thing.
Oh, it started with
I'm
C#.
learning
It started with C#. It is
because
beautiful.
I'm trying to learn it from a JavaScript perspective. Yeah. So it's interesting to see how some of the languages borrow from each other.
Absolutely. So did you see what I'm doing here? I'm pulling in the list view that I just defined, and that has an item source property. And I'm going to be super lazy here. I'm just going to give it the whole thing.
Okay. It's interesting that you don't use the curlies to bind at the top level.
What do you mean?
I'm just in the XAML that you just type my posts without curly braces around it.
Well, when I say this, I know JavaScript is loaded up with this. What I mean, this is the visual tree, like this element or this object model for my thing.
Yeah, the C# makes sense to me. I'm saying in the XAML, right. Actually.
Yeah. Okay, so does this compile?
Ivana says #show us the data. We all want to see the data, Sam. Show us the data.
Okay, it built. I'm not sure if the syntax is going to be okay. Let's try.
It's all right. It better be okay, Sam. You've got a crowd full of people that are just
cheering to get
anxiously waiting, like the drum roll.
Oh boy.
You want to see the list.
Maybe.
So the workflow here is that your app CS file through like some of that iOS code delegates to your main page where your C# code fires this up, and then the XAML actually tells it how to render. Oh, there we go. Data.
We have data. So yes, to answer your question, we have data. So essentially, what you see here is those 100 things coming down from the server. It's obviously not formatted right because like it's starting up right here, which I can fix. So we can give it a margin on a post. But this is one of the upsides of using a little bit of a polished control that's not just baked into Xamarin Forms. So this particular list view has features like so. This is just 100, but I didn't know how much was coming down from the server, right? So if this was 1,000,000, we will be in trouble. So what you have is not that you should bring down 1,000,000 records into your client side, but if you did, this one has some virtualization built in. So we are only going to bind like 100 or 200 records at a time, and then as you scroll, like you can see how the scrolling is fluid, it gets the next 100, next 100. It's kind of like a bite-sized pieces of what you want to do, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And I think like this was one of the demos we showed for like native script a lot, is like a benefit of using just native code versus something that's web based, is that you can build these lists that are incredibly rich and powerful, that are, it's still really tricky to do on the web. And lists are, like, if you think of it, so many mobile apps are just lists, more or less. Like if you think about Facebook, Twitter, like, I mean, these apps do a whole lot, but at their core, they're basically just a giant list. So it's an important one to get right.
So let's see if the margin makes it look a little nicer, maybe. Yeah, somewhat. So it got like margins across everything, but you get the point. Yeah.
Is there any concept of, and maybe this can be my last question, but from a workflow perspective, is there anything like a hot reload that you can do so that you don't have to go through the compilation
I am glad
cycle?
you asked. So this, okay, let me back up. So you have it easier on the web side of things, because when you're writing JavaScript, you have things like Webpack, which can look at exactly which component you changed and only package that up and throw it out. We don't have that. So we have to be very careful. And this was one of the pain points with Xamarin Dev. Like Xamarin tooling, if you looked at this, like you said, you looked at it like 4 years back, it used to be a little rough. We have been trying to get over the pain points. There are some very good friends of mine who work on the Xamarin team as PMs, and they're continuously trying to improve the product. Things have come a long way, and I can do things right in here. You can see like my the app is running. So let's see if I can change things up here. Yep. So hopefully, if I can just save. And maybe I don't, oh, I got the newest bits, so maybe it just does not have Xamarin Forms hot reload enabled. But yes, we can totally hot reload, not just XAML nowadays, we can also hot reload some C# stuff.
Well, maybe we could save some of this for like Xamarin, when we do Xamarin 102, because I, like, immediately at this point, like I have some additional questions that are going to blow out the scope of this, like, because I'm curious of things like development workflows. Like, okay, if I want to do something Android, iOS specific here, what would I would do? But I think I'm going to hold those, because I think there's enough here that there's definitely room for
and we
for
can
doing
keep on building.
secondary lessons.
I apologize. I got the latest bits yesterday, so I don't know exactly what I need to do to enable hot reload. It should be by default nowadays, but
that's fine. I just wanted to know if it existed.
It does actually. So we can hot reload things. Maybe I need to get the latest Xamarin bits. Anyways, it could be any number of things, but maybe it is something we take on in the like 1 or 2 thing, like you said. Let's recap a little bit where we started. So we talked about all the things that Xamarin can do for you, where it fits in the .NET picture. In fact, if you are a .NET developer, this is one of the easiest ways to take your .NET code outside of Windows or like universal Windows platforms. You can run on iOS and Android beautifully. You get a lot of help out of the box. Like you saw, TJ, like the tooling is really rich. And yes, it's a big download maybe, but you get everything out of the box, and then it knows how to build for iOS. It knows how to build for Android. You get simulators for iOS, you get simulators for Android, and it's also relatively easy to deploy onto devices. And also be able to preview some of the visual tree that you're building. You can also preview it, how it looks like, without actually running your app. And then you can also do hot reload. There's also a concept of hot restart now. So if you were running your app on a phone connected to Visual Studio and you had it plugged in, you can quickly restart your app and just only push out the bits that your app has changed. So the tooling has come a long way, and it's a fun place for .NET developers to be. But we have barely scratched the surface. There's a lot to do. We just wanted to like a one-on-one thing of getting a list down and showing it. But there is a concept of styles. There are concept of more concepts about data binding. We didn't even talk about navigation. There was Brian Lagunas in the chat room. He talked about Prism. That's like a model view, ViewModel way of doing things. And obviously, like what you see here, this is kind of very basic. So right now I'm doing everything all in one place, which is not good architecture. So I should ideally, like this thing that I created, this posts thing, which was my sort of my model, this should be in a separate file. This should be in a separate folder. So we have that separation of concerns. Like this is my model. This is my layer that talks to my data tier. This is where I call the services. So we can really architect and structure this app. So what I can do, TJ, is I can just actually keep this project as is. So next week you can start heckling me back on exactly how to do other things, and we can build from here, right?
Yeah, it sounds good. I like that. The heckling role is actually kind of fun because I don't have to do anything. I can just sit over here in the corner of the screen and ask questions. So
Yes.
I am on board.
Yeah, and I'm on board when you teach me React. In the chat room, folks were asking if Xamarin is free. This is a happy story because, like, if you asked me this 4 years back, Xamarin used to be expensive. This was one of the roadblocks because it was $1,000 per developer per platform, right? So if you had to build iOS and Android, it'll be like $2,000 per platform or per developer. But now Microsoft has taken over Xamarin. It was more of a merger, and then they went open source. So all of Xamarin tooling is free, starting from Visual Studio Community Editions onwards. You can make it work, everything free. There are some services that are cloud-based that are not entirely free, and that's for a good reason. Like that's a happy place to be if you get to a point where you have to test your app on hundreds of Android devices, or if you have to throw some analytics on your app and see how people are using it. Those are things that are paid for, but that's a Visual Studio subscription service, and that's a place where you'll be happy to pay Microsoft a little bit of money if once you get to that place. But to build your app, to get the tools, to get started, it's all free. There is no barrier to entry. All right, so Emerald Dimir in the chat room said he or she had doubts, but he'll give it a try before learning Swift. Yes, definitely do. I tried learning Swift, and again, coming from a .NET background, some concepts were very similar, but some things were not. But this is a very easy way for us to go cross-platform, and it's 2020. Hopefully, we are writing cross-platform apps because, again, if you write it for iOS tomorrow, your customer is going to come and ask for Android or other platforms. So if you can go cross-platform, I think that's a place you want to be.
Sam, you just said it was snowing there. It just started like hailing or sleeting outside here. So I got distracted here for a second because it's like whatever nonsense is coming down out there. It's just fun times.
Oh, Emerald Dimmer is in Turkey. It's 36 Fahrenheit. Yeah. All right, it's fun times. Okay, so sorry I went a little over. We were just trying to do a hello world thing of pulling down some data and showing it, but this is 101. TJ, any questions so far?
I don't think so. I think just to wrap things up, a couple things about the stream itself. I mean, if you enjoyed any of this, you can follow CodeItLive. We do streams like this. I know I've done a similar series for React 101. Maybe we can do a React 102 sometime as well. And then tomorrow, Sam, I don't know if you want to bring it up, but
I can talk about it. So tomorrow,
yeah, go for it.
What was the URL? And maybe somebody
I just type in quarantine coding
in the chat room can. Well, I can actually look up Twitter.
Yeah, I can get it.
Because I know I've been tagged in those posts. So if you're in the chat room and if you're watching this stream, come and join us tomorrow. We are trying to do something super fun. And let me close down Visual Studio so it doesn't keep eating up my precious RAM. Where is it? Quarantine coding. This is what we are doing tomorrow. So no, not that. Where is our landing page? No.
Just put it in the chat if you've got that open.
There you go. Did the stream just go black? That's bad. Okay.
Yeah, it paused for me.
Okay, so anyways, if you are here, come and join us tomorrow. We are doing like 7 hours of non-stop coding. We're going to try to build a app from scratch and have a little fun doing so. So come and join me and TJ and Alyssa and Ed from our team, and we'll try to have a lot of fun. Okay, I don't know if my audio is still carrying out on the stream. Let me refresh. Looks like it kind of paused for a second. But I did want to thank folks one more time for joining us this morning or afternoon or evening. Ed saying Twitch is unstable. Sorry folks. It's not us. It's Twitch this time. But thank you if you can still hear us, and hopefully you will come and join us tomorrow, and keep coming out here and chatting with us next week, where maybe we can take this same project and the same concept to the next level with a 1 or 2 thing with Xamarin.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
All right, cool. Thank you. Thank you. We shall see you next week or tomorrow if you can join us. So thank you very much.
Yep.
All right. Bye, folks.